What's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It is Kevin Forte coming to you with another video. Today, we are taking a look at the Boston Bruins and my predictions for what this season could look like for the Bees. It was a rough year for the Bruins in the 2024-25 season, ended with them missing the playoffs. And I think the part that was the most concerning for the Bruins is the fact that they finished last in the Atlantic Division. That is not something that we are used to seeing from the Boston Bruins. They finished as a top 10 in the draft in this year's class. They did pick up James Higgins, which is kind of a nice prize to kind of make up for it. But they finished tied with the Philadelphia Flyers at the bottom of the Eastern Conference. When's the last time we have seen the Boston Bruins in that type of position? Now, there's kind of a crossroads here for the Boston Bruins. Is this the year where last year was a bit of a transition year, and this season with a healthy roster, hopefully a little bit better goaltending, that this team can get back on track? So, looking at the lineup, there's reason to believe that this team can be pretty good. And you look for optimism and points to be like looking forward to. There are definitely some on this team. But there's also a lot of questions in the sense of, like we've seen these guys before and we know what they are. What's all of a sudden going to turn them to another level? And that's also part of the way you could kind of look at a lot of these guys. So the top line, as of now, according to Daily Faceoff, they have Morgan Geekie, Elias Lindholm, and David Pastrnak. No real surprises there. But this is kind of what I'm talking about is, are those guys going to just jump off the wall and all of a sudden just go to another level? I don't necessarily know if that's going to happen. Pavel Zacha, Middlestat, and Arvidsson on the second line. It's crazy to see Casey Middlestat on the Boston Bruins. That one's going to take a while to get used to. I'm sure Sabres fans are not thrilled with that. But that's the reality here, and I think that it could be a good second line center, but it's kind of a wait and see there. I don't know if he's necessarily the answer on that second line, but that's, again, it could be a boom or bust with Middlestat. That's a big one to watch for. Third line, you got Tanner Jeannot, who they added in the offseason. A lot of questions about that. A lot of people like the player, not the money that he's making. So if you're able to separate the money from the player on day one of the season, and he's playing well and doing what you expect Tanner Jeannot to do, then I think you'll be happy with him. But if you continue to look at that number on the websites that show salary, it might be a little bit difficult. And I think if Bruins fans can accept that, there were a lot of teams interested in Jeannot. And as a third-line player, that's a solid option for the Bruins. And that's a guy, if need be, he can jump into the top six for a little bit of time. Then you have Fraser Minten and Matej Blomel. I definitely didn't pronounce that right. Matej Blomel. So that's your third line. That's a completely different looking third line for the Boston Bruins. Should be pretty interesting. That could be a wild card third line in the sense that they could really help elevate that team, or it could also really bring down the Bruins next season. And then you got John Beecher, Sean Corrali, and Michael Eyssimont on the fourth line. Again, another guy, Eyssimont, I'm so used to him being in Tampa. Going to be weird seeing him in Boston. John Beecher, there's a little bit more upside, hopefully, with him. I think Bruins fans are maybe close to giving up on what he was drafted potentially to be. But he could still be a good, serviceable player in the National Hockey League. Just, is he going to be a top six winger? Maybe not. But we'll see what happens this season. And then on the defense, there's a lot of injury stuff. So that's part of the issue here. So you've got Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy, both missed extended time last season due to injury. They're your top pair. So right there, that's a concern. Because if they're not healthy, there's always that when they come back, are they the same player? That happens a lot to a lot of defensemen. And Hampus Lindholm's up there a little bit more in age, which makes you wonder even more, how is he going to recover and heal? That's going to be an interesting one. The same thing for Charlie McAvoy. Less concern there, but still moderate concern considering he is the Bruins' best defenseman. Then the second pair, you've got Big Z, who he doesn't like to be called that anymore. I got to stop saying that. Nikita Zadorov and Henry Jokiharju. Again, that's a decent second pair, but I don't know if that's necessarily the best second pair in the league. And again, in the Atlantic Division, where there's going to be a lot of competition on this division just alone in the Atlantic, the Bruins, there is reason for concern here. And then you've got Mason Lohrei and Andrew Peeke. I love Mason Lohrei. I think a lot of people love what he did last season, watching some film. That's a guy that I think Bruins fans are really going to like for a long time. he might end up taking that spot on the second pair, where Zadorov is now, maybe. So we'll wait and see what happens there. But Mason Lohrei is one I would definitely be watching. If you haven't been watching the Bruins for a little bit, that's definitely one to keep an eye on. And then in between the pipes, we've got Jeremy Swayman and Jonas Korpisalo, which obviously we saw that last season. It's not the same as Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman, but I think this is a combination it's workable. It's suitable for an NHL roster to be competent. Does that mean that they're, I don't expect them to be stealing a ton of games like some of the big elite goaltenders, but not that there aren't that many like game-changing goaltenders, right? Like, I just need a goaltender that I'm not talking about every day because he gives up 5 or 6 goals. If I don't have that, I'm happy with it. I think that's what the Bruins should be expecting, really, from Jeremy Swayman and specifically Jonas Korpisalo. Just do your job, and everything will take care of itself. That's the way they got to look at it. So, with the way this team is built, I think their penalty kill should be pretty good. A lot of these guys are pretty defensive-minded, good two-way players, which leads me to the issue, which is there enough scoring depth on this team? And you've got Pasternak and Lindholm and Geekie. Those guys can score. Zaka and Middlestat and Arvidsson, they can score. But Arvidsson, the situation in LA didn't really work out because he wasn't scoring enough. Tanner Jeannot, maybe Fraser Minton, but I just see a bunch of guys that are good penalty killers. And that's great to have. You need to have those guys on your team. But the culture of this team is definitely going to be more of let's force the other team to make mistakes, and the 3 or 4 opportunities a game that we get, we have to score on, right? And that's kind of the way I think of the Bruins going into this season. There is some guys that have some good experience, and that's a good thing. But my question is, the young guys, there isn't a ton of hype around some of the younger players that are jumping into the lineup. Maybe Fraser Minton, maybe. And Mason Lohrei, who we've already seen. But then, like, the guys they added, like Jeannot and Arvidsson, like, they're good players. But is that going to elevate this team to the next level? And I just don't necessarily know if that's going to be the case. They've lost a lot of centers over the last couple of years. David Krejci, Sean Kuraly, Patrice Bergeron. I mean, as much as I like Middlestat, Lindholm, and Minton and Kuraly, I mean, that top 4, it's a little bit either. I mean, you know what you're getting with Kuraly on the 4th line. I think that's good. But the rest, I mean, Lindholm was good during stretches last season, but then Middlestat and Minton, you're like, all right, let's see what you got. And when we're saying that in the beginning of the season for a team you already aren't sure is going to score a lot of goals, that sets a lot of expectations on guys that are in new spots, maybe higher in the lineup than they're used to. And until you kind of see what they can do burning out in the sun, you're never going to really know what they're capable of. And we're going to find that out for some of these guys on the Bruins this season. So with that said, I do think the Bruins are going to be better than they were last season. I mean, 76 points was bad. I don't think the Bruins are going to be that bad this season. Like I said, they had injuries last season that really burned them. I could see them getting closer to that. On the low end, I would say 80 points, which is still 4 points higher than this past season. And I'm almost tempted to say maybe 86 points for the high and just missing the playoffs. I don't know if the Bruins did enough to make the playoffs. Looking at the reality is too, the rest of this division is really competitive. The Senators are not going anywhere. The Canadiens aren't going anywhere. The Sabres are the Sabres, but you can make fun of the Sabres all you want. They had more points than the Bruins last season. So it's one thing for the Bruins where you could just blame it on injuries. That's definitely something to point at. But if we get to halfway through this season and we're seeing kind of the same situation, don't be surprised if the Bruins maybe look to sell a little bit more and really invest in that rebuild, because I think at this point they're trying to hold on. They see what they have here. They see the young guys that are coming up like James Higgins and some of the other young players they've drafted, but they've also had a couple guys that have missed, like Fabian Lysell, that, realistically would be perfect on the top 6 of the Boston Bruins right now. And they're not, because they didn't develop those prospects. And because of that, you're starting to see it affect the team. And unfortunately for the Bruins, it does make you wonder, is there questions? Maybe we talk about Don Sweeney next summer and maybe being on the hot seat. I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about that next summer, but these are just my thoughts I'm spitting out there. I'd love to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Like I said, realistically, I think anywhere between 80 to 86 points for the Bruins, pretty realistic. And like I said, in a competitive Atlantic division, everybody might be around that same spot, right? You might have one or two at the top of the Atlantic that dominate with 100-plus points, and then everybody else could be between that 80 to 90-point range, and it could be a win or two against a division rival that ends up separating whether you make the playoffs or not. And if the Bruins are in that conversation, I think that's a successful season. Obviously, missing the playoffs for a second consecutive year would suck, but the reality of this team that we're looking at, I would be okay with that. I think that's them reaching the potential that they're capable of. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.